stop overthinking the damn thing and just do it. On the menu today at Sarah's Soju Cafe is banana milk matcha. So grab your mugs and let's chat about setting goals for 2025. Hello, welcome back Soju Shotties to another episode of Soju with Sarah. I am your host, Sarah. If you're new here, I feel like I never introduce myself, which I probably should because we do have a trickling in of new Soju Shotties. And sometimes I just forget that you guys don't have like the knowledge of what I've said in previous episodes. So my name is Sarah. I'm 27 years old. I'm the host of this podcast and thank you for joining us today. This is actually my third time filming this episode and this whole week has been so exhausting because I wanted to make an episode about 2025. I know we still have 2 months before it's 2025, but I think it's very important that we start thinking about the new year and preparing for it and reflecting on it. And I did this whole thing yesterday where I was scripting it out and thinking about what I wanted to say, outlining it as I do on my podcast episodes before I film. I think I just like to have structure. Like I'm the type of person that likes to be prepared in any situation that I'm in. And so I wrote down all these tips and things about planning and prepping and reflecting and talking about different things like the Ikigai method or the Odyssey plan. And I filmed 30 minutes of it. I felt like it just wasn't me. Like I felt like a very standard archetype of a self-help creator and I didn't feel like it really resonated with me, what I was saying. And so I went down this whole rabbit hole of feeling so confused about what my purpose for this episode was. And I think I got really in my head about the whole thing. I think in human nature, it's very easy to get distracted by over planning and also that you need complicated systems in order to do something. And I am a chronic overthinker myself. And so I've noticed that I have a tendency to stop myself from actually doing the thing that I want to do and spending way too much time on the pre-planning and the thinking and the prepping. So in the spirit of today's episode, I decided to just turn on the camera, start my little ramble and stop overthinking the damn thing and just do it. And I think this is really important too, leading into 2025, because for some of us, I know we wait until January 1st or the beginning of the new year to start whatever new project, self-improvement habits, or goals that we have. And as much as it is fun to wait for the new year to start and have the excitement around the new year, I think there's a lot of value in starting things when you have the chance and when you have the thought in your head. And so that is what we're going to talk about today on this episode. Before we get started, we have our not soju cup today that I really need to upgrade. I've been meaning to make more cups in the studio, but I haven't had a chance to. But I have banana milk matcha in this mug, and this recipe is one of the recipes that I'm glad I found on TikTok, because sometimes I try recipes and it doesn't turn out exactly the way that I expect. But I have my Nami matcha and my banana milk, and we are going to try it. If any of you guys have easy access to banana milk, I highly recommend this. It is so good. It is also starting to get colder in New York City. So it's been 70 to 80 degrees the last couple of weeks, which is insane to say out loud because it was October just last week and now it is November, but we're finally entering like 60 to 50 to 40 degree weather. And yeah, so maybe we should do some hot drinks as we enter winter. I think that would be so cute. Actually, this is going to be the first winter season on Soju with Sarah because we've only ever had summer and cold drinks, but maybe we can do like hot chocolate for some upcoming episodes. Anyways, getting into the episode, I wanted to bring up something that I mentioned in a previous episode. If you have watched, I think it was about either scarcity mindset or opportunity cost, but there's an episode where I mentioned that last year I had a little mini crisis at the end of the year because I realized that I hadn't done anything meaningful for myself and I hadn't made any strides towards my personal goals, towards my personal wellness. And I felt like I was very stagnant last year. And I think that feeling that I carried with me exiting that year subconsciously influenced how I approached this year. So I'm very happy to say that I am leaving 2024 with a lot of positive memories and also accomplishments that I am very proud of. This podcast, I talk about how much I love this podcast and I'm very proud of it so often, but it is probably top on my list of things that I've accomplished this year. And amongst that list of other things that I'm very glad I undertook this year is pottery and starting that new creative journey for myself, because I felt like I hadn't had an avenue to explore my creative and artistic side the last couple of years, but also my fitness journey, which is something that I talk about once in a while on the podcast. I think I sprinkle in conversations about my fitness journey, but I've never been the type of person to be super active and super fit. I generally have been very sedentary my whole adult life. And if you ask me to do anything super athletic, I just can't do it. But this year, I kind of set my mind to starting this fitness journey with weightlifting and trying to be more plugged into workout classes and Pilates and yoga. And this is the first time that I've also seen change in my body. Right now, I'm actually on a little bit of a break from working out, both because it is hibernation season, but also the past few weeks have been kind of busy, but I am very proud of myself for taking that leap this year. I think a lot of the positive change that I've seen in myself this year comes from my ability to stop myself from overthinking and just start the task, whatever it is. I'm definitely not perfect and I tend to overthink things still on a micro level, but I think on a macro level, I've tried to push myself this year to just start something or do something if it is on my head. And so whether that is fitness related, wellness related, or just projects that I want to do. But also as a caveat, there are certain things in life that you can't just jump into and you have to plan before you do it. But I think there's never a perfect time to start something, but starting something when you first have that idea or thought to do it is probably, in my opinion, the best time to start. And so as we think about 2025 and our goals for it, I think the most optimal time to start and begin is now. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about more in depth is the paradox of planning. And planning is always a great step to take in any business venture, life endeavor, things like marriage and kids, they all require planning. But there is this double-edged sword to planning where on one hand, it might prep you and prepare you for something. I think that's the same word, prep and prepare is the same word. But on the other hand, it can really paralyze you with too much optionality and choice and too much pre-work. I think a good example is this podcast episode. I spent a lot of time thinking about it and planning it out and realizing at the end of all this pre-work that what I wanted to say wasn't even conveyed in the heaps of research that I had done. And in the past, I feel like there's been so many situations where I've given myself excuses that in the moment felt like they were very valid, but then I come out of it realizing that I just prevented myself from doing something that I was very excited to do. So to me, I think there's a very healthy balance to strike between prepping and giving yourself excuses. I think this can also be framed as the all or nothing mentality, which I personally find very toxic when doing something requires all things to be perfect rather than some things to be perfect. Sometimes I tell myself things like, once I'm better at pottery, I'll start a pottery shop, or once I have more money, I'll start a business, or once I have more sunlight coming into the apartment, I'll film more apartment content and share more about my life in my apartment. And I think a lot of us can probably relate to this feeling of nothing's ever perfect. And as a perfectionist myself, I always want things to line up perfectly so that I can undertake a new venture or a new task. I hate the sense of feeling like I haven't done well enough or I haven't prepared well enough before I jump into something. And I think it's this fear of discomfort and this fear of newness and novelty that I try to counteract with perfection. And I just think it's not very healthy because at the end of the day, whenever I tell myself these things, it delays me by weeks or months or years even before I get to start something that I'm really excited about. I remember when I first started filming YouTube videos, I had spent 4 months picking up the camera on one-off occasions, trying to film a little bit and then putting it back down and saying, oh, my bedroom doesn't look nice, because I was in like a flex bedroom with a roommate back then, trying to film YouTube videos, and I had to whisper because I didn't want my roommate to hear. And I'd be like, oh, once I move out of this apartment and I don't have a roommate anymore, it'll be so much easier for me to film YouTube videos. And I remember it took up until the pandemic for me to actually pick up a camera and film, because I was just waiting for this period of my life to pass so that I could start something that I've always wanted to do. And I realized so many times that other things in my life get delayed because I'm telling myself that right now is not the right time to start. But looking back, very rarely do we have the perfect opportunity to do something. And the times where I've thanked myself the most with respect to a life change or a project that I've done is when I just do the thing despite the situation not being perfect. I think the period in my life where I implemented this whole concept of just do it and don't overthink it is when I first started my YouTube channel, because after that stint of like 4 or 5 months of being so coy and shy about filming and then not following through with the whole process of creating a YouTube channel, I entered the pandemic. I had to be at home, and then it was yet another series of being in a situation where it felt awkward and I had to film in front of my family, and it was very cringy to me because we also didn't have a lot of space, so I would film in this one hallway for most of my videos, and I felt like situationally things weren't right either. And for the first couple of months I was like, I don't think I can do this. But then it got to a point where I realized I was delaying myself so much by giving myself excuses. And I just started filming. I picked up my camera. I started piecing things together. But with all the excuses that I give myself, I think at the end of the day, what I realized is that the best journey is the one where you're figuring things out, problem solving, and growing along the way, instead of the ones where you have everything sorted out and figured out at the very beginning. I like to think that when we start goals and projects and new ventures that we take for ourselves, the least consequential time is at the very beginning. And so that's also when you have the liberty to start figuring things out. I want to do an episode on perfectionism one day, and so this is kind of leaning into that topic a little bit. But something that I hear all the time is that there's never a right time or the perfect time or the perfect situation to do something. And I recall talking to a mentor of mine about work and taking a break from work or leaving work and quitting my job. And something that they told me is that you'll always feel like you're in between projects, or you're trapped between different life situations or different things that require you to delay a change, such as leaving your job. And I remember my therapist was also sharing something along the same lines of that, where in life you rarely have opportunities where things are absolutely perfect for you to make a life transition. And so I remember at the beginning of the year, this was when I was at a very low point in my personal life and my mental health, and I was so incredibly stressed and anxious and depressed, and I felt like I needed a break from work. But at that time, I had this one project that I was wrapping up and finishing, but then there was this second phase to the project that I was supposed to lead and direct. And in my head, it was the perfect reason for me not to take a mental health leave. I remember having this conversation back and forth with my therapist and my boyfriend about what I should do with that situation, because I felt like I personally, on a mental level, needed to take a break from work. But on a work level, I felt like I had this commitment that was keeping me from taking a mental health leave. And at the end of the day, if you follow me on other platforms, you know that I did take my mental health leave. And at the end of my mental health leave, when I actually went back to work, I found out that the project that I was going to lead actually got deprecated in favor of a new project. So I think that was just one life lesson for me, that there's no perfect time for anything. And when you're evaluating your goals or things that you want to do with your life, you shouldn't delay it because of comfort or other reasons and excuses that you give yourself. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is how the new year always acts as a crutch for people. And I think in the past, when it comes to a new year, I always use the period of a new year starting as the comfort time or the comfort zone for me to actually begin something. There's this concept called the fresh start effect, where people tend to use temporal landmarks such as the new year or a change in season to kind of define the beginning of a new journey. And that is where they have this new spark or motivation to do something. And that is also where a lot of our goals become a little more reckless and overly ambitious. It's because we have this false sense of there being like a blank slate. And this might not be so scientific, but I think having this fresh start also translates into having a serotonin boost or a dopamine boost. And that's what causes a lot of us to burn out, especially with our goals. A lot of goals aren't instantaneous. And I think the impression that we have when we start off the new year with this whole fresh start is that the reward comes very quickly, which oftentimes it doesn't. And I feel like that's how some of us fall into this trap of not following through with our goals. So in my personal opinion, in my personal experience, I actually think that starting a goal or a habit before a temporal landmark breeds a much healthier ground for building a routine and a system around a specific goal that you might have. An interesting thing that my friend recently told me about is setting pre-resolutions. And these are just mini goals and mini versions of goals that help you get to the right cadence and balance of developing a new habit. A good example of that is with fitness. So instead of starting off the new year, going to the gym 3 times a week, which you can probably sustain for a week or two before you realize that you really don't like going to the gym and yada, yada, yada. But a good replacement for that resolution is setting small pre-resolutions, which act as mini versions of what you want to do and kind of just like ease you into that pattern. So instead of going to the gym 3 times a week, starting from the beginning of the new year, you can set a pre-resolution right now to start going to the gym once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks, build up to twice a week, and then slowly increase that to 3 times a week. And so this trains you to integrate a new goal or habit into your life a little more seamlessly. If you think about fitness training, there's a reason why weightlifters start at lower weights and build their way up to heavier weights, because your body can't take instantaneous change so easily. And so that's just a little tip that my friend told me. And if you're like me and have a hard time sticking with goals, I think it's a really helpful way to ease yourself into a new goal or resolution that you have. There's also this concept of the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the outcome or output of something comes from 20% of the effort. And I think that rings true of goals and setting habits as well, where I think some of us approach goals thinking that we have to put in 100% commitment and 100% effort into what we're doing in order for that to create change in our lives. But oftentimes it's kind of the small things that have this butterfly effect on your life, whether it is your health and fitness or your career, where a small change is enough to create a larger, grander effect. So that's just one thing to think about when it comes to setting and creating goals. I think the next thing that I wanted to talk about was how to actually create good goals for yourself. Personally, I am a culprit when it comes to setting bad goals, and I think I'm not the best at setting goals, but I have been trying to be more intentional when it comes to creating frameworks for me to think about what I want to do and improve in my life. Something that I learned from Reddit is when it comes to setting goals, there's a framework. It's a SMART framework to think about goals, like literally SMART, SMART. I'm going to look off to the side so I can read the correct definition, but SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. One thing that we do at work when it comes to quarterly planning is actually rewriting and reframing and focusing on creating goals and OKRs that kind of fit into the same framework. The first metric is specific, which I think is pretty straightforward. Having a more specific goal is always going to be better than having a broad and generalist goal. I think specific can also mean that the goal is personalized to you. I keep on using fitness as an example, but instead of saying, I'm going to be more active this year, something specific like I'm going to start taking Pilates classes once a week is so much more attainable than having something where the parameters are non-existent. And the second metric is measurable. And I always like to think about my goals, whether it's for work or my personal life, with quantitative values. So if we have a feature that we're building out, the OKR or goal that we set for the quarter will look something like increase traffic to this feature by 10 times. And so 10 times is the quantifiable improvement that we use. I think a lot of the times when it comes to a goal, for example, like losing weight, having a specific amount of weight that you want to lose is always a great way to keep track of your progress and see how close you are to reaching your goal. The third metric is achievable, which means that the goal should be achievable and it should be something that is reasonable for your personal value system, your physique, if it is something physical, or your mental load and your ability to take on a certain task or project. Oftentimes, it's really easy to be overly ambitious with our goals and look at other people and say, oh, they can run a marathon. I could definitely run a marathon. But then you realize going into it that you don't have the right training or stamina or things like that. The third metric is relevant, and relevant is actually really interesting to look at because relevant, I think on a team level, means that this goal or OKR is relevant to what the company is doing or relevant to the team. I think on a personal individual level, relevant more so means that it's relevant to your life and that it has a positive impact on your life and will be valuable for you to invest your time into. Generally, I would just say that this relates to value alignment and alignment with you as a person. So if that goal is something that aligns with where you want to be in life. The last metric is time bound, and this means that the goal should have some amount of finite duration. When goals have infinite duration and they never end, it's really hard for us to measure our progress and actually compare where we are and where we ended at versus where we started. But I think one of the challenges that I go through on a daily basis is realizing that there's not enough time in a day to do everything on my to-do list and reach every one of my milestones and goals that I want to. And so something that I learned recently is called the Eisenhower matrix. This is essentially a quadrant that you can draw out. So it will be 2 lines and there will be 4 categories, but you basically treat the vertical axis as the importance line. So this is hard to describe, but important will be at the top, not important will be at the bottom. But then the horizontal axis will be used to describe urgency. So urgent will be on the left and then not urgent will be on the right. And essentially when it comes to your goals and priorities in life, you can kind of fit it into each of these buckets and place it as something that is important or not important and urgent or not urgent. And then the second step that comes from this is figuring out what exactly to do with each of these tasks. So in the urgent and important section, that is something that you should probably do immediately and accomplish as soon as you can. But then when it comes to things that are not important but urgent, it might be something that you can delegate. Oftentimes what causes me overwhelm is I feel this desire to take over everything and do every aspect of every project and everything that I'm doing by myself. But there's a lot of value in reaching out to other people and getting help when you need to. And delegation is one of those things that you can do. It is a learned skill though. This is something that I'm still learning myself, but learning to delegate your tasks becomes like an increasingly more and more valuable skill to have in life. But oftentimes when you're looking at the Eisenhower matrix, you can look at this bottom left quadrant and see that as something that you can possibly delegate to other people. When it comes to this quadrant on the upper right hand side, because it is not urgent, it is probably something that you can schedule. And so in this quadrant, these tasks are things that you should plan for, but not necessarily do in the moment. And then the final category is the bottom right. And these are tasks that are not urgent and not important. And so these are tasks that you can probably delete, eliminate, or just move past. Or you can do it if you do have the time. But I think this is a good framework for looking at the different goals that you have and the different priorities and steps that you need to take with your goals. And I think this framework helps a lot to make you feel less overwhelmed when it comes to starting a new goal. But I just wanted to throw that there because I know sometimes it's really easy to see all the things that we need to do and all the things that we're prioritizing and suddenly just push it all off because there's just too much to go through. One of the things on my agenda for next year in terms of my goals and priorities is actually learning this bottom left quadrant of delegating. I think I've always avoided it like it's a plague, but I think there's so much, like I mentioned, value in learning how to ask for help and how to have other people help you in the process. The last thing that I wanted to say when it comes to setting goals is sometimes it's really good to think about anti-goals. And by anti-goals, I actually mean thinking about things that you don't want to do. So when it comes to setting anti-goals, a really easy way to set anti-goals is to look back on the year that you just had and think about all the things that you want to deprioritize. I think for a lot of people, anti-goals are probably habits that are not very healthy. So things like waking up and checking your phone immediately, or going out every single weekend and drinking every single weekend. I think some anti-goals for me this year are sleeping late and not eating well. I think I have a tendency to lean onto easy foods too often, whether it's like frozen foods, microwaved foods, or just foods without that much nutrition. Anti-goals are like the negative version of the positive goals that we have, but it's good to know what we want to avoid for the year going into it so that we avoid bad habits. And I don't know how long this episode is yet, but the last thing that I do want to share are my goals for this year. I think it's always nice to hear what people prioritize and what people want to do in the new year. And I know we're still early on and I've mentioned that before, but I think hearing other people's goals might kind of inspire you to think about your own goals too. So part of next year, I want to focus on 1, exploring my creativity, 2, redefining my personal identity, and 3, focusing on spending more time with my family. And to break that all down, because we are not, I think these are very broad and very general and definitely not using the SMART framework to think about it. But for the first one, with exploring my creativity more, I started pottery this year because I wanted to really tap back into the creative side. I've mentioned this before, but I think in my corporate tech job, I don't really get the opportunity that much to exert myself in I forget if it's the left or the right side of my brain, but the side of my brain that is creative and loves art and adores all things visual. I think I often find myself in a pattern of not exploring my artistic side because I'm either too scared to venture out of what I'm used to. So on the pottery wheel, I think I oftentimes throw mugs because I am just most comfortable with that. But I know there's so much in ceramics that I haven't tapped into yet and that I haven't really ventured into as a ceramicist. I also used to love graphic design and fashion design. I haven't really sewn anything since the pandemic, and I used to sew so often because my mom is a seamstress, but there's just so many elements of my creativity that I feel like are missing. And to make it more measurable, I want to set certain milestones for myself, but I also want to experiment with more mediums of art next year. And so some of the mediums on my bucket list are more graphic design and fashion design, which I've loved in the past, and possibly more 3D mediums of art. I've been looking a lot at 3D printing. I know this is like a really random thought and we're going down a tangent again because I didn't outline this, but 3D printing is really exciting to me and I want to see what I can do with that in ceramics. And so that's something that has been on my mind, but this one's a little bit harder to make measurable and quantifiable because it is more just like a tangible art form, but that is my first priority and goal for next year. The second goal that I have was redefining who I am. And I don't really necessarily want to say rebrand myself because I feel like that sounds so dramatic and intense and not necessarily the point I wanted to get across. But I think in the last 3 or 4 years of living in New York City, I felt like I've been slowly losing a little bit of my personal identity. New York is very strongly rooted in culture and fashion and creativity. And I think I've gotten so much inspiration from other people, but at the same time, I'm starting to feel a sense of loss with who I am, both from a visual standpoint and like my personal taste and my personal style. But I think my personal style has always been one of the root things that makes me feel the most confident. And between balancing my job and my creative projects and other priorities that I have in life, I really feel like I haven't invested much into myself and my own identity, and I feel that trickling out of my hands day by day. And so that's something that I really want to refocus my energy towards. I think I'm having a hard time making my goals very measurable. So maybe I am defying a little bit of what I said with the SMART framework, but I think this is a very relevant goal to me. And I think on this specific front, I want to try to reclaim a little bit of my style. And so I think the first specific thing that I want to do with that is just explore my personal taste and fashion sense again. There's been other podcast episodes where we've talked about how important it is to reflect your own identity through what you wear and how you present yourself, because that is a core building block to your own identity and how confident you can feel about yourself. But the last one is I want to spend more time with family. And in that vein too, I want to spend more time with friends. I realize how passive I've been the last year and a half when it comes to friends and family, that I only actively initiate hanging out when it's a holiday or when it's a specific, like I mentioned previously, like temporal landmark. Like that's when I feel the strongest in terms of reaching out to people. And maybe because I am an only child, I have a really hard time keeping connected to people. I think there's some amount of like individuality and loneliness that comes with being an only child that I've kind of carried into my adulthood. But I really want to have very frequent, consistent opportunities to see my parents and also to see my friends. And so in the measurable sense, I want to see my parents at least once a month. I know it's not a lot, but I think when you live 4 or 5 hours away from your family, it is a little bit harder to make it out. So I do want to see my parents once a month. And I also want to take them on an international trip. My parents haven't really traveled that much. And I think one of the things that would bring them joy in the next year is being able to experience a new part of life. This is a topic for a whole other time, but I think as a child of an immigrant, whenever I go through experiences for the first time or even the second or third time, like traveling and visiting new places, I always feel a certain amount of guilt and desire to have my parents with me there, whether it's literally just going to the grocery store and seeing something cool and funny. I just want to share that with my parents. And so next year, a big goal of mine is to go on a trip at the beginning of the year or maybe like mid-year. But yeah, enough about traveling and parents and being an only child. I think today's episode, I just wanted to talk a little bit about setting goals for 2025, how to actionate on it, how important it is to just act on it. James keeps telling me that actionate is not a word, but I feel like it should be a word. Actionate just sounds right, you know? But yeah, I think the point I wanted to drive home today was just, if you have a goal, you should get started on it now and don't wait for the new year to come. Don't give yourself too many things to pre-plan or to pre-prep unless it is starting on your pre-resolutions. And yeah, I know time goes by really quickly, so before we know it, it is going to just be 2025. But I hope this episode was a little bit helpful. If you have any time today, please definitely share your resolutions for 2025. Only if you have it though, because no pressure if you don't have your resolutions yet. I know we still got a couple of weeks and a couple of fun episodes because I'm excited for the Thanksgiving episode and the Christmas episode. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. As always, if you guys enjoyed the podcast episode, please rate us on Spotify, give us a thumbs down and then a thumbs up, and then give us a comment or a like, which I already said. But thank you guys. As always, I hope you have a wonderful weekend and week ahead, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.